I never thought I'd be that guy, the one who ends up in a full-on war with an HOA over a piece of land that's been in his family for decades. But here I am. And if you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with a power-hungry HOA, well, you'll probably relate to this story more than you'd like. My name's Ethan Cole. And a few years ago, I inherited a quiet stretch of lakefront property from my late uncle. It wasn't much, just a cabin, a small dock, and a few acres of trees hugging the waterline. It was peaceful. No noise, no neighbors, no rules. Or so I thought. I used to visit the cabin a few weekends every year, mostly to fish, clear my head, or just sit by the campfire with a beer in hand. But over the last couple of years, life got busy. New job, city life, the usual grind. So the cabin sat untouched for a while. That's why, when I decided to spend a long weekend there last summer, I was practically buzzing with excitement. I packed my truck with camping gear, food, my kayak, and even a small solar setup I'd been meaning to test out. I was ready for some me time. No stress, no internet. Just me and the lake. The drive up was nostalgic winding roads, pine trees swaying, the smell of clean air. But as I got closer to the property, something felt. Off. The familiar dirt road leading to my cabin wasn't empty anymore. There were signs. Big ones. Bright white with blocky black letters. Private property, HOA residents, only trespassers will be prosecuted. Lake Access Limited. 2 members of Lakeside Meadows community. I slowed down, frowning. HOA. What HOA? There'd never been one here before. I drove past the signs, figuring maybe some new development had popped up nearby. But as I reached the clearing, my stomach dropped. My cabin was still there, but the area around it wasn't the same. There was a brand new gravel parking area, a playground nearby, and picnic tables set up just down the slope near my dock, and people. Actual people, families, kids, couple grilling burgers, all hanging out like it was a community park. I pulled up confused and stepped out of my truck. A man in a neon vest approached, clipboard in hand. He had that tone, the I'm in charge here kind of swagger. "Hey there," he called out, squinting at me. "Can I help you?" Yeah, I said, glancing around. "What's going on here?" "This is my property." He laughed. Actually laughed like I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Your property. Buddy, this is Lakeside Meadows community land. Maybe you took a wrong turn." That's when my patience started thinning. I told him my name, explained I'd inherited the land. Even gave him the old lot number, Lot 1 to B, the same one that had been on every tax notice since I was a kid. He looked me up and down, smirked, and said, "Never heard of you. You'll have to talk to the HOA president about that. But you can't just drive up here and camp." "You're trespassing?" I couldn't believe it. Me, trespassing? On my own land? I didn't want to start a scene, not yet, so I decided to play it cool. I parked my truck by the cabin and started unpacking anyway. That's when I saw it, a fresh lock on the cabin door. Not mine. That's when my calm turned into ice-cold anger. Someone had been using my property. And not just that, they'd taken it over as the sun began to set. I broke open the old window latch and stepped inside. Dust everywhere. Cobwebs. The faint smell of mold, but there were also signs of recent use. New furniture. Cups in the sink. A stack of Lakeside Meadows HOA newsletters on the table. They'd literally moved into my cabin and turned it into a community recreation lodge. I sat down in disbelief. This couldn't be real. My uncle had paid taxes on this land every year until his passing, and I'd continued it since then. I had the paperwork, the deed, everything. But apparently, this HOA thought otherwise. The next morning, I woke up early and set up my camping tent by the lake. If they thought I was trespassing, they'd have to prove it. I wasn't leaving around noon. A white SUV pulled up with Lakeside Meadows HOA magnets on the side. A woman in her late 50s stepped out, sunglasses, clipboard. The whole Karen-in-Chief aesthetic. She walked straight up to me like I was a rebellious teenager sneaking into a country club. "Sir, I'm Linda Marks, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced. "You're on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I calmly replied. "You're standing on my private property, actually. So maybe you're the one who should leave." She tilted her head, clearly not used to hearing no. "That's impossible," she said. "This land was donated to the HOA for community use by the previous owner." "Now, please," I cut her off. "Donated. Lady, the only donation my uncle ever made was to the local fire department. I have the deed in my truck. You're trespassing." She blinked. Then her expression hardened. "If you refuse to leave, I'll be contacting law enforcement." I laughed. "Go ahead. Please do." And she did. About an hour later, I heard the crunch of gravel again. This time, flashing lights reflecting off the lake. 2 county sheriff deputies stepped out of their cruiser. "Afternoon, sir. We got a report of a trespasser on HOA property." One of them said. Linda was standing proudly beside them, arms crossed like she'd just won a neighborhood bake-off. "Officers," she said, "this man broke into our community lodge and is now illegally camping on HOA land." I handed the deputies my ID and then walked to my truck, pulled out the deed folder, and gave them the documents. They took one look, radioed something in, and after a few minutes, their tone changed completely. "Ma'am," the deputy said, turning to Linda, "according to county records, this land belongs to Mr. Ethan Cole. The HOA has no ownership rights over Lot 1 to B." Her jaw dropped. You could hear the gears grinding in her head. "That can't be right," she stammered. "We've maintained this property for years." "Maintained," I said. "You mean stole." The deputy handed her my deed folder. "Ma'am, unless you have legal proof otherwise, you and your group are trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave." Linda's face turned red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally muttered, "This isn't over." She stormed off, her SUV kicking up dust as she drove away. I watched her go, a mix of victory and fury churning inside me. But as I looked around at the picnic area, the dock they'd repaired, the playground on my land, something told me this was just the beginning. Because if they'd been using my property for years, then they weren't just trespassing. They'd been profiting from it, and I was about to find out just how deep their scam went. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning, I woke up to the sound of loons echoing over the lake. Normally, that sound meant peace, quiet mornings, fresh coffee, the smell of pine. But not today. Today, it sounded like the calm before a storm. I made my coffee on a small propane burner, watching the mist roll across the water. The air was still, but my mind wasn't. Linda's words kept replaying in my head. We've maintained this property for years. Years, that meant this wasn't just some misunderstanding or a few misplaced boundaries. This was organized. And I was going to find out how deep it went. After breakfast, I walked around the lake to inspect the rest of the area. The HOA had really gone all out. There was a boat dock with the HOA logo carved into a wooden sign, a kayak rack, even a fenced section labeled Lakeside Meadows Private Swim Zone. They'd practically turned my property into their personal park. But here's what really got me: the fence line. When I checked the boundary markers on my GPS map, it was obvious. The HOA's park wasn't just touching my property. It was built entirely inside it. They weren't borrowing space. They'd stolen nearly all of my shoreline. I drove down to the county land records office the next day. It was a small beige building with flickering fluorescent lights and a smell like old paper and coffee stains. The clerk, an older man with glasses hanging halfway down his nose, looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, setting my deed on the counter. "I need to see the property plat for Lakeside Meadows and the surrounding lots, especially Lot 1-B. He squinted, typed for a bit, then printed out a large map. When he laid it flat, my suspicions were confirmed. Lot 1-B, my land, extended 50 yards past the lake's edge, wrapping around a good chunk of what the HOA now called their community park. "Looks like they built right on top of your property," the clerk said, shaking his head. "This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about that HOA either. Bunch of overreaching folks." I frowned. So they knew. Seeing, he sighed. "Maybe not at first. But the developer who started Lakeside Meadows was notorious for fudging property lines when selling lots. My guess? He told the HOA the lake was part of their amenities package, even though it wasn't. I asked if there were any records of the so-called donation Linda had mentioned. He chuckled softly. "Donation. If someone donates land, it has to be recorded. There's no such record here." Bingo. On my way out, I stopped by the county archive room. It was dusty and quiet. Rows of file cabinets and old tax books. I found the drawer labeled Lakeside Meadows Development 2001 to 2010 and started digging. That's when I found it. A folder labeled Maintenance Budget, Lakeside Amenities. Inside, there were invoices, bank statements, and what looked like internal HOA documents. Most of it was routine landscaping, insurance, lake cleanup. But a few line items stood out. Annual community dock permit fee, $4,000 lakefront maintenance, $7,200 cabin lodge upkeep, $5,600. Wait a second. Cabin lodge. They'd been charging their members maintenance fees for my cabin. That meant every homeowner in that HOA had been paying into a fund that directly benefited from property they didn't own, and someone was pocketing the difference. I made copies of everything I could find and headed back to my cabin. When I arrived, I wasn't alone. Linda's white SUV was back, and this time she'd brought backup. 2 men in HOA shirts were standing near my tent, talking in low voices. One of them had a clipboard. The other had a camera, taking pictures of my truck, my tent, even me walking up. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone cool. "Back for round 2. Linda turned, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Cole, we're documenting your violation of community standards. You're still camping illegally on HOA grounds." I couldn't help but laugh. "You really don't quit, do you? You called the cops yesterday, and they told you this is my property. What part of that didn't click?" She ignored me and waved at the guy with the camera. "Make sure you get photos of the illegal structures and any damage." That's when I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Linda, I've been to the county office. I know exactly what's going on. You've been charging your members for access to this land for years. That's fraud. And if you don't back off, I'll make sure every single homeowner here finds out." Her expression faltered for the first time. "You wouldn't dare," she said. "Oh, I'd love to." She left without another word, but I could see it in her eyes. Panic. She knew I wasn't bluffing. That night, I sat by the campfire, flipping through the documents again. There were bank transfers, service contracts, and even HOA meeting notes. They'd listed lake revenue from private rental use. Apparently, the HOA had been renting out my cabin to guests through their own internal booking system for weekend retreats. My jaw clenched. They hadn't just used my land. They'd profited off it, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a case of trespassing or negligence. It was organized theft. And I had the proof, but I also knew one thing. HOAs don't go down quietly, especially not ones that had been running a hidden cash stream for years. So I decided to do something bold. I called a friend, a guy named Luke, a local attorney who'd handled land disputes before. I told him everything. After a long pause, he said, "Ethan, if what you're saying is true, they've been collecting and spending money illegally. You could sue them for restitution and damages. But if I were you, I'd gather a little more evidence first. HOAs like this love to play dirty." I leaned back, staring at the glowing embers in the fire. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm just getting started." The next morning, I set up a couple of trail cameras around the property, hidden near trees, facing the dock, the path, and the cabin. I wanted to see who came and went when I wasn't there, and sure enough, by the third day, I got footage that made my blood boil. A group of HOA board members, including Linda, arrived with cleaning supplies, lawn tools, and what looked like donation boxes. They were hosting a community cleanup day on my land, and to top it off, they'd set up a banner reading, "Lakeside Meadows HOA, proud stewards of our lakefront." Yeah, my lakefront. That's when I decided to set my plan into motion quietly, carefully, and with precision. Because if Linda and her crew thought they could bully me into walking away, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Asterisk, asterisk, when someone tries to steal from you and gets away with it for years. The anger doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, slow and cold, like the fog that rolls over a lake before sunrise. That's exactly how it felt the next few days. I wasn't just mad at Linda or the HOA board. I was furious at myself for not checking sooner. They'd used my family's land like it was a playground, and I hadn't even noticed. But now that I knew, I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Luke, my lawyer friend, called later that week. "Ethan," he said, "I've looked over the documents you scanned. This isn't a mistake. They've been falsifying HOA reports to justify collecting lake maintenance fees. That's embezzlement, plain and simple." I asked what the next step was. "Before we file anything, we'll need hard evidence that they knowingly used your property for profit. A few photos and invoices help, but what would really seal it is catching them in the act, something on camera, something they can't deny." That gave me an idea. I drove into town and bought 2 new game cameras, the kind that sync to a phone app, sending instant photo alerts. I also picked up a small drone from a local tech store. I wasn't about to play nice anymore if the HOA thought they could hide. I was going to catch every move they made. That weekend, the HOA had a big event planned. According to their website, it was the annual Lakeside Family Festival. Guess where they were holding it? You guessed it. On my property, Saturday morning rolled around. I parked my truck a few hundred yards down the dirt road and hiked through the woods, staying out of sight. As I reached a ridge overlooking the lake, I saw the crowd gathering tents, food stalls, music, the whole 9 yards. It was surreal. Dozens of HOA families laughing and dancing, all on land they didn't even own. I launched my drone, keeping it high and steady. From above, I got crystal clear footage of their banners. Food vendors, even a payment booth labeled Festival Donations, HOA Members Only. I zoomed in on Linda herself, wearing a floral blouse, shaking hands with a few homeowners. They were congratulating her, thanking her for organizing the event. If only they knew. A few hours later, I drove back into town and met Luke at his office. It was a small brick building with shelves stacked with legal binders and a coffee machine that looked older than both of us. He plugged my SD card into his laptop, watched the footage, and nodded slowly. "This is perfect. They're collecting money on your land, clear as day. You've got trespassing, misrepresentation, and financial fraud. We can hit them with everything." He leaned back in his chair. "But before we go to court, I want to make sure they don't try to clean up the evidence once they realize you're onto them. You should bait them, make them think you've backed off." That made me grin. Bait them? I like that idea. So, that night, I posted something subtle on the local community Facebook page, the same one where Lakeside Meadows residents love to gossip. I wrote, "Hey folks, just wanted to clear up some confusion. I've decided to let the HOA continue using the lake area for now. Working on some paperwork with them. Should be all sorted soon." It spread fast. Within hours, I saw comments from HOA members thanking me, praising Linda for resolving things, even sharing photos from the festival. Perfect, because now I knew they'd get comfortable again. And that's exactly what I needed. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was walking near the cabin when I heard voices, two HOA members, both middle-aged guys in polos, carrying trash bags from the festival. They didn't see me at first. One of them said, "Linda said the lawyer's not going to be an issue. She's got that donation thing handled." The other replied, "Yeah, she said the original landowner signed some kind of release years ago. Guess that means we're in the clear." My blood froze. A release. I'd never signed anything. Neither had my uncle, at least, not legally, so whatever document they were talking about, it had to be forged. I quietly pulled out my phone, hit record, and caught every word. When they finally noticed me standing there, they froze like deer in headlights. I gave a little smile. "Don't worry, gentlemen, just enjoying the lake." They nodded awkwardly and walked off fast. That evening, I sent the recording to Luke. He called almost immediately. "Ethan, that's a goldmine. If they're using a forged document, this just went from civil fraud to potential criminal charges." I exhaled slowly, watching the sunset burn orange across the water. Then let's make sure it all comes out in the open. The next phase of the plan required one more step, catching Linda directly. So I set up a small hidden camera inside the cabin, pointing toward the main door. If she came snooping around again, or brought that fake release form, I'd have her on tape. Sure enough, 2 nights later, the camera pinged my phone with a motion alert. I opened the feed. There she was, Linda Marks, flashlight in hand. Rifling through drawers in my cabin, she pulled out a folder, checked a few pages, then made a call. Her voice was low, but I could hear enough. "Yeah, I found the old papers. The Cole family deed isn't filed under the right lot number. We can use that to challenge ownership if we need to. I'll make copies and send them to Greg." My jaw tightened. So that was their angle. They were planning to exploit a clerical mistake to claim the land wasn't officially mine, even though I had the updated tax records. That was all I needed. The footage, the documents, the audio. It was time to put an end to this. The next morning, I called Luke again. "I've got everything," I told him. Footage of her breaking in, admitting to manipulating records, and evidence of financial fraud. He whistled softly. "Then it's time to file the lawsuit and notify the county sheriff. You're about to make a lot of people very nervous." I grinned, looking out over the lake, my lake, as the early light shimmered on the water. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because now, I wasn't just defending my land. I was about to expose an entire HOA for the crooks they really were. Asterisk, asterisk, the next few days felt like something out of a slow-burning thriller. Everything looked peaceful on the surface, birds chirping. The lake still as glass, but beneath that calm was a storm about to explode. I'd gathered all the evidence I needed: video proof of Linda breaking into my cabin, audio of HOA members discussing forged documents, financial records showing years of lake maintenance fees. And with Luke guiding me, it was time to turn the tables. We filed a civil lawsuit against the Lakeside Meadows HOA for trespassing, fraud, forgery, and unlawful enrichment. But Luke also did something clever. He sent a formal notice to every homeowner in the HOA. It was a simple letter explaining that the land the HOA had been using for community purposes was privately owned. and that all collected fees associated with it were part of an ongoing legal dispute. That one letter lit a fuse. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Homeowners, dozens of them, were leaving voicemails. Some were angry, some confused, some apologetic. "I just found out we've been paying for your property for years. What's going on? Is this true?" Linda told us the land was donated by the Cole family. "I can't believe this. We've had fundraisers for that cabin." The HOA's secret was out. That evening, I sat on the porch of my cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunset. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing the truth is finally catching up to people who thought they could manipulate everyone around them. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Linda don't admit defeat. They double down, and she did in spectacular fashion. The next morning, a large envelope was taped to my cabin door. The letterhead read, "Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, Legal Counsel." I tore it open. Inside was a cease and desist letter demanding that I stop harassing and defaming the HOA. They accused me of falsifying records, illegally surveilling the community, and occupying disputed property without authorization. At the bottom, Linda's signature sat there in that self-righteous, looping handwriting. I almost laughed out loud. They were panicking. Desperation makes people sloppy, and that's exactly what I needed. Luke wasn't surprised when I brought the letter to him. He skimmed it, chuckled, and said, "Classic intimidation tactic. They're bluffing. Let's keep tightening the net." He then revealed the next move. He'd subpoenaed the HOA's bank records, and we'd soon get to see exactly where all that lake maintenance money had gone. That's when things got really interesting. A week later, Luke called me in. His tone was serious this time. "Ethan, you're going to want to see this." He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet filled with transactions, thousands of dollars in reimbursements, event expenses, and management stipends. But 3 names appeared over and over. Linda Marks, Greg Harmon, the HOA treasurer, and Marilyn Cates, the secretary. Luke pointed at one entry. "See this? $12,000 labeled as dock repairs. The contractor listed doesn't exist." That money was transferred directly into Linda's personal account. He clicked another. $7,500 for insurance coverage for Lake Lodge, same pattern. Money went from HOA dues directly to her. I stared at the screen, stunned. "They've been using my property as a money funnel." "Exactly," Luke said. "And when you factor in the HOA dues, community fees, and donations, we're looking at over $100,000 in misused funds, all justified using your land as a prop." He leaned back in his chair. "You've got them, Ethan. All we need now is to show intent. Prove they knew this was illegal and kept doing it anyway." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I've got just the plan for that." That night, I posted again on the community Facebook group, this time a little baitier. "Appreciate everyone's messages. Hoping we can settle this peacefully. I'll be camping one more weekend by the lake if anyone wants to talk face-to-face before the lawyers get involved." It was subtle but effective. The comments exploded. Dozens of homeowners wanted answers. Rumors started flying that I was trying to blackmail the HOA, that Linda was planning an emergency board meeting, and I made sure my cameras were all rolling. 2 days later, around sunset, I heard engines approaching. 3 SUVs pulled into the clearing, Linda, Greg, and a few other board members. They stepped out, dressed sharp, carrying clipboards and folders like they were going to a boardroom meeting instead of trespassing again. Linda spoke first. "Ethan, we need to clear the air," she said, voice tight. "You're causing unnecessary panic in our community." I kept my tone calm. "Linda, you've been trespassing and profiting off my land for years. You broke into my cabin. You forged documents. What exactly do you think we need to clear up? Her eyes flicked nervously toward Greg. We didn't forge anything, she snapped. We simply acted based on the information we had. Information you created, I said. Care to explain the $12,000 you paid yourself for fake dock repairs? Her face drained of color. Greg stepped forward. You don't know what you're talking about. Those were legitimate expenses. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The video I'd captured of Linda in my cabin played loudly in the open air. Her voice echoed off the water. The Cole family deed isn't filed. Under the right lot number, we can use that to challenge ownership if we need. 2. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a pin. The other HOA board members looked at her in horror. One of them whispered, Linda, what did you do? I lowered my phone. Don't worry, I said quietly. I already sent everything to my attorney and the county sheriff. She stammered, Why? You can't do that. That's private. Private. I interrupted. You broke into my property and stole from dozens of homeowners. You think you get to talk about privacy? Greg muttered something under his breath and turned away. Realizing it was over, I stood there as they climbed back into their cars and drove off. No shouting. No threats, just the quiet, humiliating sound of defeat. But I knew it wasn't the end. Because when people like that fall, they don't fall gracefully. They take as many down with them as they can. Sure enough, the next morning, Luke called me again. You're not going to believe this, he said. Linda just filed a countersuit, claiming you defamed her and illegally recorded private conversations. I sighed, shaking my head. Of course she did. Don't worry, Luke said. It's all smoke. Her own members are turning against her now that they know the truth. Just keep your cool, the storm's about to hit. I looked out over the water, the lake shimmering under the morning sun. Peaceful again, as if it already knew justice was coming. Because this time, the HOA wasn't just losing access to my land. They were about to lose everything. Asterisk, asterisk, by the time the sun rose the next day. The entire Lakeside Meadows community was in chaos. Emails were flying, the HOA group chat was blowing up, and homeowners were demanding answers from their so-called leaders. My post had done its job. The truth was out in the open, but the real fireworks were just starting. I didn't even need to lift a finger. The homeowners did it for me. Apparently, a few of them had already called an emergency HOA meeting to confront Linda and the board. And because people love transparency when drama hits, someone decided to record it. That recording ended up in my inbox later that night, and what I heard made my jaw tighten. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Dozens of residents filled the room. The sound of murmurs, folding chairs scraping against the floor, papers rustling. Someone shouted, Is it true you've been collecting money for property that isn't even ours? Linda's voice came through, strained but defiant. That's not true. The Cole property was donated years ago. We've always maintained it as community space. Another voice fired back, then showed the donation paperwork. There was a long pause. You could hear the crowd stir. Finally, Greg, the treasurer, spoke, his tone cracking. We don't have it. It was handled before our time. That set off a wave of shouting. You mean we've been paying extra dues for a park we don't even own? You lied to us, Linda. What did you do with the money? Linda tried to calm them, but her voice was drowned out by outrage. And then came the sound of someone slamming their hand on the table. Enough? I'm calling for a vote to remove the current board immediately. The crowd erupted in applause. That was it. The HOA had turned on itself. That was it. The HOA had turned on itself. Asterisk. That was it. The HOA had turned on itself. When I heard the recording, I couldn't help but smile. They'd done my work for me. But something still bothered me. Linda wasn't stupid. She might have been greedy, arrogant, and controlling, but she wasn't dumb. Someone must have fed her this donation story in the first place. I needed to know who. A few days later, I went back to the county office to dig deeper. This time focusing on the original development records. The clerk recognized me right away. "Back again, Mr. Cole. You making us famous or something?" I grinned. "Trying not to, but I need all files related to the original developer, Lakeside Meadows Estates." "Year 2003, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that year?" "Yeah. Why?" He flipped through a dusty binder and pulled out a manila folder stamped with a familiar name. "Developed by Harmon Realty Group." Harmon. That was the same last name as Greg Harmon, the current HOA treasurer. I flipped open the folder, scanning the documents. There it was, a copy of the original subdivision plan, handwritten notes, and early land proposals. Most of it looked normal until I reached a page labeled Lake Access Agreement Draft, unfiled. It was a fake transfer form, transferring access rights from my uncle's land to the developer. But it had never been signed. Still, the signature line bore a familiar scribble. M. Cole. Only problem was, that wasn't my uncle's signature. Not even close. I knew it immediately. He had a very distinct way of writing the C, looping it twice. This one was flat, sloppy, completely off, and at the bottom, "Filed by G. Harmon." My pulse quickened. Greg's father, the original developer, had forged my uncle's signature decades ago to claim shared access rights. Then his son, now treasurer of the HOA, continued the lie and used it to line his own pockets. This wasn't just a local dispute anymore. It was a family-run fraud that had been buried for 20 years. I took photos of every page and brought them straight to Luke. He spent nearly an hour reviewing everything before he finally leaned back and let out a low whistle. "This is huge. This isn't just an HOA issue anymore. This is property fraud, forgery, and generational embezzlement. We can take this to the county DA." I exhaled slowly. "Do it. You sure?" he asked. "Once we involve the DA, this becomes public record." "It'll get messy." I nodded. "Good. The people deserve to know who they've been paying all these years." The next few days were a whirlwind. Investigators arrived, county inspectors started measuring boundary lines, and the local news caught wind of the story. It spread fast. HOA accused of using private property for profit, fraud under investigation. My name was in the article, but I didn't mind. Every word brought me closer to clearing my family's name. Meanwhile, Linda's house became a war zone. Angry residents gathered outside, demanding she resign. Some carried signs reading, "Where's our money? HOA equals hiding our assets." And when the county announced they were freezing the HOA's bank account, pending investigation, the homeowners really turned. Linda and Greg vanished for a few days after that. Then, late one night, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside my cabin. For a moment, I thought it might be the sheriff again, but when I looked out, it was Linda's SUV. She stepped out slowly, her hands shaking, eyes hollow. She wasn't the smug, clipboard-wielding queen anymore. She looked broken. "Ethan," she called softly. "Please, can we talk?" I didn't answer right away, just stood there on the porch with my flashlight. Finally, I said, "Talk, but I'm recording this." She nodded weakly. "Fine, I deserve that." She told me everything. How Greg's father, the original developer, had acquired the lake access rights illegally. How the HOA had inherited the fake paperwork without realizing it at first. And how, when she found out the truth years later, Greg convinced her to keep it quiet to avoid lawsuits, promising it was harmless. "I knew it was wrong," she said, tears in her eyes. But he said everyone would lose their homes if I told the truth. I sighed. Instead, everyone lost their trust. She nodded, whispering, "I'm sorry." "Ethan, I really am." For the first time, I almost believed her. Almost, but apologies don't erase crimes. Especially ones that last decades. The next morning, I handed the recording to Luke. He sent it straight to the county investigator. That was the final piece. Within a week, both Linda and Greg were formally charged with fraud, falsification of property records, and misappropriation of community funds. The homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, and me. Well, I finally had my lake back. All of it. Every inch of shoreline that belonged to my uncle and now to me. But this story wasn't over yet. Because as the investigation deepened, something even bigger surfaced. Something that would change how the entire town saw the Lakeside Meadows development forever. Asterisk, asterisk, when the dust settled around my lake. I thought that was the end of it. Linda and Greg were arrested. The HOA was dissolved. And the homeowners began rebuilding their sense of community without manipulation or fear. But one thing, I've learned when you pull on one thread of corruption, you rarely find just one knot. You find a whole tangled web. A few weeks after the charges went public, Luke called me to his office again. He had that same grim look he wore when the sheriff first accused me of trespassing. The kind of look that meant something big was about to break. "You might want to sit down for this one," he said. Sliding a manila folder across his desk, I opened it, expecting more legal paperwork, but what I saw made my stomach twist. It was a series of property maps marked with red dots. Each dot represented a subdivision in our county. Each subdivision had something in common: a lake, a creek, or a stretch of forested land, all maintained by different HOAs. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Luke leaned forward, his voice low. "This isn't just about Lakeside Meadows. It's part of a larger pattern. Each of these HOAs has been using private or public land under fake maintenance agreements. Some of them even built clubhouses or docks on property that doesn't belong to them." I frowned. "You're saying this is coordinated?" "That's what it looks like," he replied. "And guess whose name keeps popping up as an accountant, consultant, or treasurer on the paperwork?" He flipped another page. At the top, bold letters read, "Harmon Community Management, LLC." My pulse spiked. Greg's family business, so that was it. Greg's father hadn't just forged my uncle's signature. He'd created a whole system. A network of HOAs, each one siphoning funds and quietly taking control of prime real estate under the guise of community use. They'd been doing it for nearly 2 decades. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in maintenance fees collected every year, all hidden behind a maze of fake legal terms and shell companies. And the craziest part? Most of the homeowners had no idea. They thought their dues went toward mowing lawns or repainting signs, not buying access rights they already owned. That's when Luke dropped the real bombshell. "The county DA wants to open a full-scale investigation," he said. "But they need someone from the inside. Someone directly affected who can testify how it all started." I knew where this was going. "You mean me?" T nodded. "You've got the records, the history, and now the evidence from the lake case. You're the perfect witness." I stared at him for a long moment. The idea of stepping into court again, this time against a whole network, felt heavy. But deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. "All right," I said finally. "Let's take this all the way." The next few weeks felt like living in a movie. State investigators came to interview me, going over every document I'd collected. They traced the money flow from the homeowners' dues to Harmon Management, to offshore accounts tied to dummy companies. It was a massive operation, bigger than anyone had imagined. But with every new discovery came a new problem. Someone out there didn't want this to see daylight. It started small. A car idling outside my cabin late at night. A drone hovering just above the tree line, disappearing the moment I stepped outside. Then, one morning, I thought it was kids or fishermen. But then I saw the footprints, heavy boots, multiple sets. They weren't there to fish, they were sending a message. That evening, I drove into town to talk to Luke, but before I could get out of my truck, a folded note was tucked under my wiper blade in black marker. It read, "Drop the case or you'll lose more than a lake." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling that mix of anger and unease crawling through my chest. But instead of throwing it away, I took a photo and handed it to Luke the next morning. He frowned. "They're getting desperate. That means we're close." Then he leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. "Ethan, you've already exposed one HOA. Now you're about to blow the cover off an entire statewide racket." They're scared. That's a good sign. 2 days later, the state attorney general's office announced a joint task force investigation. Local news stations were calling it the HOA land theft scandal. But everyone in town knew I was the guy who started it. The investigation uncovered 9 more communities involved, all linked to Greg's late father, and all with similar forged documents. Some of those communities even sat on federal wetlands, which meant this had just escalated from county fraud to federal land misuse. It was no longer about one greedy HOA. It was about an entire empire of stolen land. When I testified before the grand jury, I told them everything. How the HOA had harassed me, called the cops, and tried to label me a trespasser on my own property. How I found the original documents and how deep the deception went. I ended with this. This wasn't about neighborhood rules or grass height. This was about power, about people thinking they could take what wasn't theirs because no one would fight back. Well, someone finally did. The courtroom went silent. For the first time, I felt the weight lifting. Not just for me, but for every homeowner who'd ever been bullied, fined, or threatened by the kind of people who hide behind an HOA badge. That night, I went back to my lake. The sky was clear, the reflection of the moon dancing over the calm water. For the first time in months, it felt peaceful. No signs, no patrol cars, no trespassing tape. Just quiet. But even as I stood there, I knew something still wasn't right, because in all that paperwork, in all those files from Harmon Realty, there was one document that didn't fit. A single file referencing a master development plan with a note that said, Phase 2, pending approval for 2025. That was now. Whatever the Harmons had started years ago wasn't fully finished. And if I was right, someone else was still running it. Someone bigger. Someone who wasn't done stealing yet. Asterisk, asterisk, the words, Phase 2. Pending approval for 2025 haunted me. Even after the arrests, the court hearings, and the grand jury testimony, I couldn't shake it. If Greg's father had set up the first round of HOAs, who was behind the second? I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But I knew where to start looking. A few days later, I went back to the county records office. The clerk, same guy who'd helped me before, gave a weary grin. "Back again, Mr. Cole. You're starting to feel like part of the staff." I said. "Might as well give me a desk. I'm looking for something called the Master Development Plan, Phase 2. Any idea who filed it?" He frowned and typed for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed. "That's strange. It's listed under the County Infrastructure Committee, not a private developer. And it's restricted, only accessible by government officials or authorized legal counsel." My stomach tightened. Government involvement. That explained why the scam had survived so long. It had protection from the inside. I called Luke right away. "I found something. The next phase of the plan, it's under county control." There was a pause on the line, then his voice dropped low. "Ethan, I was afraid of that. I've been looking into campaign finance records. Guess who funded the county commissioner's last election? Don't tell me. Harmon Community Management, and a dozen shell companies tied to them. It all clicked into place like a bad jigsaw puzzle. The HOA network was never just a private scam. It had evolved into a political machine, laundering money through community projects to keep corrupt officials in power. The commissioner, Richard Vance, had been using these fake HOA developments to funnel land rights into county expansion projects, then selling access rights back to his donors. And Phase 2. It wasn't just another neighborhood. It was a planned redevelopment that would swallow up 3 more lakes, including mine. That night, I sat on my dock, watching the ripples of moonlight shimmer across the water. I'd fought so hard to protect this place, my family's legacy, only to realize it was still under threat. Just from higher up the food chain, I clenched my jaw. If Vance thought I'd stay quiet, he didn't know who he was dealing with. The next morning, I went straight to the county courthouse. I requested an appointment with Vance's office, not as a resident, but as a whistleblower tied to the ongoing investigation. To my surprise, his secretary called back within an hour. Commissioner Vance can see you today at 2 p.m. Perfect. His office was exactly what you'd expect. Expensive furniture, polished floors, walls lined with framed photos of handshakes and ribbon cuttings. He stood as I entered, flashing that fake politician's smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mr. Cole," he said warmly, "I've heard quite a lot about you. Quite the crusader, aren't we?" "Just trying to keep my land," I replied evenly. "Understandable," he said, motioning for me to sit. "I imagine it's been quite stressful. All this publicity, the legal battles, the misunderstandings." That word, misunderstandings, made my blood heat. But I kept my voice calm. Funny thing about misunderstandings, they tend to clear up when people start telling the truth. His smile flickered for a split second. Then he leaned forward. "You've done impressive work uncovering fraud, Ethan. But sometimes exposing too much can cause instability. You understand?" There it was. The warning, I understand perfectly, I said. "You're telling me to back off?" "I'm suggesting," he said smoothly, "that you let the county handle things from here. No need to dig into old files or rumors that don't concern you." I looked him straight in the eye. "They concern me when my family's name is on them." For a moment, his mask slipped. A flicker of irritation flashed in his eyes before he stood and ended the meeting. "Take care, Mr. Cole. Enjoy your lake while you still can." That night, someone tried to break into my cabin. It was just after midnight when I heard the crunch of glass, the window by the kitchen. I grabbed my flashlight and crept quietly down the hall. A shadow moved near the back door. Then another. Before I could react, the sound of tires screeched outside and the intruders bolted, vanishing into the woods. When I called the sheriff, he arrived within minutes, but the tracks were already cold. Luke came by the next morning. He looked at the damage and muttered, "They're getting bold. This wasn't random. Someone wanted to scare you off." I nodded. "Too bad for them. I don't scare easy." If Vance thought he could intimidate me into silence, he'd underestimated how far I was willing to go. So I decided to fight back the only way that really hurts a corrupt politician, through exposure. I sent the files and voice recordings to 3 news outlets, including one investigative journalist known for taking down dirty developers. Then I posted a public video on social media showing the forgery evidence, HOA links, and a few carefully chosen details about the Phase 2 expansion plan. The story blew up. Within hours, local channels picked it up. By the next morning, it was trending online under the tag #HOAGate, #LandFraud, #ProtectOurLakes, #Expose the Scam. Expose 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 Whistleblowers from other HOAs started coming forward. Emails surfaced showing his staff coordinating fake zoning meetings and property reclassifications. And just like that, the walls started closing in. The state attorney general announced a corruption task force. Vance's offices were raided. And guess whose name was listed as a key informant in the warrant affidavit? Mine? When the news broke, I stood on my dock again, that same peaceful lake, where it all began, and watched the reflection of flashing sirens in the distance as investigators carted boxes of documents out of the county building. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but also free. Luke called that night. "It's over, Ethan. Vance is done. They found everything. Offshore accounts, fake permits, falsified land surveys. The man's career is finished." I exhaled slowly. "Good. You did it," he said. "You took down an entire network." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, but I have a feeling this story still isn't finished, because one name still hadn't come up. The one listed as project director on that mysterious Phase 2 document. It wasn't Greg. It wasn't Vance. It was someone new, Eleanor Briggs, and she wasn't just a bureaucrat. She was the regional head of the State Development Authority, the agency that approved every major real estate project in 3 counties. If she was involved, this wasn't just a county scandal anymore. It was state-level corruption, and I was about to drag it into the light. I thought I had peeled back every layer of this scheme. But when that new name surfaced, Eleanor Briggs, it felt like a final door had just cracked open. She wasn't some HOA busybody or a greedy developer's heir. She was state-level authority, the kind of person who could turn a land grab into public redevelopment. With just one signature. And she'd just signed off on Phase 2. Luke was cautious when I told him. "Eleanor Briggs is not someone you want to corner lightly," he warned. "She's got connections in the capital. If she's tied to this, it won't just be her. It'll be half the planning board." I leaned forward. "Then we don't corner her. We expose her." He gave a humorless chuckle. "You've got a dangerous definition of retirement, Ethan, maybe, but I'm not done yet." Briggs was scheduled to attend a public forum in the next county, a development proposal meeting for a new Ecolac community. It sounded exactly like the blueprint of every other fraudulent project I'd uncovered, so I went. I sat near the back of the packed auditorium, ball cap pulled low, voice recorder in my pocket. When Briggs took the stage, I studied her closely. Tall, composed, her words smooth as glass. Every sentence was carefully rehearsed, talking points about sustainability, economic growth, and community partnerships. But when she mentioned restructuring underutilized water access parcels, my stomach turned. That was code for, "We're taking private land." Then she said something that stopped me cold. "Our expansion plan follows the same model pioneered by the late Michael Cole and Harmon Realty in 2003. Michael Cole. My uncle. The audience clapped politely, but I sat frozen, heart pounding. My uncle's name? The same man whose property had been stolen, whose legacy I'd spent months defending, was being paraded as the inspiration for a land theft model. Something didn't add up. Why would Briggs credit him unless she believed he'd been part of it? After the forum ended, I waited near the exit. When she stepped out, surrounded by aides, I caught her eye and said quietly, "Commissioner Briggs, I'd like to talk to you about Michael Cole." She paused, studied me for a long second, then smiled faintly. "Ah, you must be the nephew." Her tone was confident, like she already knew who I was, maybe even expected me. "You've made quite a name for yourself, Ethan, stirring up old ghosts." "I'm not after ghosts," I said. "Just the truth." Her smile tightened. "The truth is complicated, and sometimes it's better left buried, especially when it hurts the people you think you're protecting. What's that supposed to mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a crisp white card. Come by my office tomorrow. 10 a.m. If you really want answers, I'll give you some. Then she turned and disappeared into her car. That night, I barely slept. What did she mean that the truth would hurt me? Had my uncle been involved somehow? Was the land theft a cover-up for something deeper? By sunrise, I made up my mind. I was going to that meeting. Whatever it revealed, Briggs's office sat on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the city. When I arrived, her assistant led me into a conference room with panoramic views of the lakefront. The irony wasn't lost on me. She entered moments later, calm and deliberate. Coffee. She offered. No, I said. I'll take answers instead. She sat opposite me, folded her hands, and sighed. You think I'm the villain here, don't you? The woman stealing lakes from innocent homeowners. Am I wrong? Not entirely. But you're missing the origin story. She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a thick, weathered binder. When she opened it, I saw my uncle's name across the first page. Michael Coland Cooperative to 2001 proposal. Your uncle, she said, was one of the first to pitch a regional development plan that would share natural water resources across rural properties. It was supposed to bring tourism, business, sustainability. He meant well, but his partners didn't. I flipped through the pages. Every one was stamped and initialed, except the last section labeled Partnership Agreement, Harmon Realty Group. That's where the signatures stopped. He backed out, I murmured. Briggs nodded. He realized what Harmon was doing, falsifying access deeds to seize control of private shores. He tried to go to the state about it. My heart sank, and he died in a boating accident a week later. The words hit like a sledgehammer. I sat back, stunned. My uncle's death had always seemed odd. A capsized boat, calm waters, no witnesses. Now, for the first time, it felt less like a tragedy, and more like a warning that had gone silent. He was the whistleblower before you, Briggs said quietly. He tried to stop Harmon. And when he died, the project passed to new hands, mine included. By the time I discovered how deep the corruption went, it was too late. The system had already been built. Then why keep it going? I demanded. Because it funds everything, she said bitterly. Roads, schools, local projects. The entire county's economy leans on these developments. You can't dismantle it without taking down half the infrastructure with it. So you just look the other way. She didn't deny it. I tried to steer it, to keep it from hurting people. But you pulled the thread. Now everything's unraveling. I stood, staring at her. You could have stopped this. She looked tired, almost defeated. And you still can, she said. Walk away, Ethan. Let the investigation run its course. Don't dig into the old case, your uncle's death. If you do, you'll find things you can't unlearn. Her words echoed in my head as I left. Part of me wanted to walk away. But another part, the part that remembered my uncle's laugh. His stories about building a future by the lake refused to stop now. If he'd died trying to expose this, then finishing what he started wasn't just justice. It was legacy. That night, I went back through the old Harmon files. Buried deep in a subfolder of scanned documents, I found something strange, a series of payments made to the state development. Authority dated a week before my uncle's accident. All signed off by one name, E. Briggs. Eleanor, so she hadn't just inherited the system. She'd been part of it from the beginning. Maybe not as the mastermind, but as a willing partner. Now she was trying to bury the past, and I was standing right in the way. When I looked up from the documents, the night outside my window was completely still. Too still. Then I noticed the faint red light blinking from the trees near the water. A camera lens, someone was watching me. Asterisk, asterisk, that red blinking light near the tree didn't belong. I'd lived by that lake long enough to know every reflection, every shadow, and this one pulsed like a heartbeat. Someone was watching me. I turned off the lamp, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped quietly outside. The night was heavy with fog, that strange kind that swallows sound. The grass crunched faintly under my boots as I crept toward the tree line. The closer I got, the clearer it became. A small camera, camouflaged with leaves and twigs, fixed right at my cabin window. Whoever had placed it there wasn't just spying, they were tracking. I followed the faint impressions in the damp soil boot prints, leading down toward the lake's edge, and there, faintly illuminated by the moon, sat a black SUV engine off, headlights dark, but the faint glow of a dashboard screen flickering inside. I ducked behind a stump, heart thudding. Someone was in there. He breathed deeply. Steadying himself, I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the plate, and texted it to Luke.Ethan. Need a quick trace. Black SUV, license 7CX4L8. Sitting outside my cabin right now. Luke, on it. Don't engage. I smirked. Yeah, right. Because if I didn't confront them now, they'd be back with more than just a camera. I crept closer, moving low, using the brush as cover. As I reached the rear of the SUV, the door suddenly opened. A tall figure stepped out, baseball cap, heavy jacket, earpiece glinting under the moonlight. He turned toward the lake, scanning, unaware I was already behind him. Then his phone rang. Yeah, he's still here. Briggs said to keep eyes on him until tomorrow. No contact. My stomach clenched. Briggs, so much for her walk-away advice. I didn't wait for him to finish. I reached around, grabbed his collar, and shoved him against the car. You want to explain why you're recording my house? He twisted, surprised but trained, not your average goon. Probably ex-law enforcement. Step back, sir. I'm under instruction. Yeah, I got that. From Briggs' right. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed something on his wrist, a signal. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind me. Another SUV? I had seconds. I shoved him aside, bolted through the brush, and sprinted toward the water. My boots splashed into the shallows as I cut toward the dock, the one place I could lose them in the fog. Shouts echoed behind me. Flashlights pierced the mist. I dove. The cold lake hit me like ice knives, but it was silent beneath the surface. Silent enough for me to disappear. By the time I surfaced near the opposite shore, they were gone. I sat shivering on the bank, drenched and shaking but alive. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Luke. Luke got the plate. Belongs to State Infrastructure Division. Not HOA, that's government level. I stared at the message. Breathing hard, government. Briggs wasn't just protecting herself. She was using state resources to cover her tracks, and now I wasn't dealing with neighbors or lawyers anymore. I was in the crosshairs of something much bigger. The next morning, drove into town, still dripping lake water onto my truck's floor mat. Luke was waiting for me at the diner, a manila folder already open on the counter. You look like hell, he said. Thanks. You should see the other guys. He didn't laugh. Just slid a set of documents across the table. That payment trail you found, Briggs's name shows up 3 more times. Each linked to a company called North River Holdings. But here's the kicker. North River doesn't exist. It's a shell tied to the State Land Division. Basically, she's been funneling development money through ghost companies for years, so she's laundering land. Pretty much. And using HOA networks as her front line. I rubbed my face, the pieces fitting together like jagged glass. So when they trespassed on my lake, it wasn't about fishing or camping or property lines. It was about hiding proof. Luke nodded. Those old utility lines under the lake, they lead to the data servers Harmon installed years ago. You dig those up, you might find the original land records they buried when they forged everything. That's when it hit me. The real evidence wasn't in the offices or in Briggs's files. It was under the lake. That night, I went back, not to my cabin, but to the far side of the lake where the ground dipped near the old dock ruins. I carried a portable sonar scanner, borrowed from a local surveyor friend. The display flickered as I swept it across the shallows. And then it pinged. A solid shape, man-made, buried under silt about 6 feet down. I marked the spot, grabbed my gear, and waded in. As my shovel hit metal, a dull, hollow thud echoed underwater. I reached down and brushed away the mud. A rusted steel box sealed tight. I pried it open, coughing as the stench of old lake water hit me. Inside were waterlogged files, plastic-wrapped hard drives, and one small waterproof folder labeled Cole, Original Claim Documents. My heart pounded. This was it. The original property ownership logs. My uncle's signature. The unedited maps. The proof that the HOA and the state had built their empire on a lie. But just as I lifted the folder, a beam of light cut through the fog dot flashlight. Voices. He's here. I grabbed the folder, slammed the lid shut, and dove again, this time toward the reeds near the shore. Through the ripples, I saw boots stomp past the waterline. One of them bent down, shining a light into the water then. Through the distortion, I caught sight of a woman standing behind them. Tall, blonde hair tied back. Eleanor Briggs. She'd come herself. "Retrieve it," she ordered. Her voice was cold, sharp. "If he's found what I think he has, this is over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because the one thing she didn't know was that I'd already tucked the folder into a dry bag under the reeds. And when the officers waded in to search, I slipped out the other side, crawling up the embankment into the trees, cold, breathless. But alive, I could hear them shouting behind me as I climbed into my truck and peeled away. Back at Luke's, I threw the folder on the table. He flipped through it, his eyes widening with every page. "This isn't just proof, Ethan. This is a state-level crime scene. Then it's time to go public." He looked at me. "You realize if we do that, Briggs won't just come for you. She'll come for everyone tied to this." "Then let her," I said quietly. "I'm done hiding." The storm outside began to roll in, thunder echoing across the valley. Somewhere out there, Briggs was preparing to silence the truth once and for all. But she didn't know the real story was about to break wide open. And this time, the lake wasn't going to keep any more secrets. Asterisk, asterisk, the folder. The original claim documents. My uncle's signature. The forged HOA papers. The shell company trails. Every piece of the puzzle was finally in my hands. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just hide it or wait for the system to move slowly. Eleanor Briggs and her empire of stolen lakes needed exposure, and the world needed to see it. Luke and I planned meticulously. We contacted investigative journalists, state prosecutors, and a trusted IT expert who could recover the hard drive files from the waterlogged box by the time morning came. We had everything: digital copies, scans of the original deeds, and a timeline proving the fraud from the early 2000s to today. It was unstoppable. The press conference was held at the edge of my lake. The sun reflected across the water, calm and mocking, as if the lake itself had been waiting for this moment. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. Homeowners from Lakeside Meadows and the other affected communities gathered. I stepped forward, holding the folder. For nearly 2 decades, this lake and many others like it have been taken from their rightful owners. I began, voice steady. Through forged documents, manipulated HOA boards, and even government complicity, private land was turned into profit. Today, that ends. I opened the folder, letting the pages flutter in the wind. Deeds, maps, signatures, proof of decades of lies and theft. These documents show the true history. They show my uncle's rights, the forged signatures, and the network of HOAs and shell companies used to hide the crime. Reporters gasped. Homeowners whispered, some crying, others shaking their heads in disbelief. And yes, I continued, the corruption reached the highest levels of our state's development authority. Eleanor Briggs, who claimed to oversee fair growth and sustainability, has knowingly perpetuated this system. Within hours, the story went viral. Social media exploded. Local news channels broadcast the evidence. State investigators were forced to act immediately. Briggs tried to defend herself, calling it misunderstood legal structures and administrative oversight. But the original deeds, the hard drives, and witness testimony were irrefutable by the end of the week. Eleanor Briggs was suspended and investigated for fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of state funds. Multiple HOAs were dissolved, their boards removed, and their illegally claimed land returned to rightful owners. The Harmons faced additional charges for their decades-long network of forged deeds. For me, the personal victory was profound. My lake, my uncle's legacy, was finally mine, free from trespassers, fake documents, and bureaucratic manipulation. I walked the shoreline, the water lapping at my boots, and finally felt at peace. But more than that, I felt justice had been done. The truth had survived decades of deception, threats, and even death. Weeks later, as I sat on the dock, Luke came by. "You ever think about just leaving it alone?" he asked, smiling faintly. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But if I had, my uncle's fight would have been erased, and all the people still paying dues to fake HOAs would have lost their land too." He nodded. "Yeah, some legacies aren't just about property. They're about courage. Yours kept this alive." I looked across the lake. The reflection of the sky was clear now, core distorted, like the lake itself was finally telling its story, for the first time in years. I smiled. The lake had been patient. It had waited for someone willing to see the truth, and in the end, it spoke. The lake and surrounding lands were officially returned to my family. The state government enacted stricter oversight for HOAs and development projects. Multiple lawsuits were filed, recovering funds illegally collected over decades. My uncle's name was cleared, celebrated as a man who foresaw corruption and tried to stop it. I never thought a weekend camping trip would lead to unraveling one of the largest property fraud schemes in the state. But sometimes, the quietest lakes hold the deepest secrets, and sometimes, just have to listen. Asterisk, asterisk, that's all for today, folks. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.